Welcome to the Autism Central podcast, the home of real stories, honest conversations, and shared wisdom from England's National Autism Peer Education Programme. Here, we bring together autistic people and the people who love, support, and care for autistic people of all ages and backgrounds to explore every aspect of life. The National Autism Peer Education Programme is delivered by Anna Freud and commissioned by NHS England. Through education, coaching, and connection, we offer resources, group webinars, one-to-one peer support, and community events that centre lived experience and build real understanding. Our vision is a society where autistic people, their families, and those who support them are empowered, connected, and thriving. This is your space, your community, your podcast. Welcome to Autism Central. Today's conversation is about lived experience, identity, and what it can mean to finally make sense of yourself later in life. I'm really honoured today to be joined by my guest, Jo, who is a late identified autistic and bipolar woman, a parent, a carer, a writer, and an advocate. Jo began self-identifying as autistic in 2023 and was diagnosed with bipolar type 2 the same year. She lives in Leeds with her husband John and her two exceptional children who themselves are autistic and ADHD. Jo writes openly about her experiences through her Autistic and Bipolar Musings newsletter, using writing both as a mental health tool and as a way to challenge stigma, sharing honest reflections on navigating the world as an autistic and bipolar woman. She's also deeply involved in systems-level change through her voluntary roles, working in co-production and suicide prevention spaces to improve outcomes for neurodivergent children, young people and families. Quite an introduction, but welcome to the podcast, Jo, and thank you so much for being here with me today and for sharing your story with us. I'd really like to start by going back to your journey of discovery, which I touched on in the intro there, because for so many people listening, recognising themselves later in life can be both affirming, but it can also be very overwhelming at the same time. So you're here to talk about your journey of late discovered autism and bipolar and PDA. Looking back, Jo, what were the moments that really helped you to feel seen and understood?
Yeah, nice to be here, Catherine. Thanks for having me. The answer to this question is going to be quite lengthy because it was quite complicated, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of people that are kind of late discovered. So, like you said, I came to that realization later in life. I was 43, so that's kind of 2.5 years ago now. In many ways, I've kind of understood my journey and worked out with hindsight and the new knowledge about the trait. So it's kind of a journey that I've pieced together retrospectively rather than necessarily understanding it as I was going through it. I'm sure that's probably fairly common as well. And of the three conditions or traits or characteristics that you've identified, it was probably the PDA profile that first really resonated and that I first felt kind of applied to me. So I'll just take you back a bit, kind of before the two kind of identifying periods in 2023, I'd had around 15 years of recurrent depressive episodes, accompanied by anxiety. And my husband had first suggested bipolar as a possibility around 2019, but I'd immediately dismissed that suggestion because I knew that I'd never experienced mania. I'd heard or seen media portrayals of what was then known previously as manic depression. And I thought, I don't experience that extreme of, never sleeping for days and kind of going doing crazy things. So at that point, I'd never heard of bipolar type 2 or of hypermania. So I just dismissed it out of hand, thought, you're just, you're trying to bring me down, or you're not being supportive of me and my ambitions. And that's often how I would feel when I was kind of experiencing those high hypermanic kind of episodes. I would feel like I was normal, and other people that were kind of objecting to that were a bit kind of abnormal. So I've kind of felt unseen in those senses. So, but in terms of the mental health, I'd kind of kept everything really quiet, really private. I didn't really talk to people beyond kind of immediate family. But then kind of late 2019, early 2020, I started writing about my mental health. It was kind of Caroline Flack's death to suicide in early 2020 really kind of hit me, because I thought, well, I've experienced those kind of suicidal thoughts, and she was a woman of a similar age, obviously completely different lives, but I just thought a lot of people don't necessarily know what it's like to have experienced that, and I did, so I felt kind of that urge to write about it, to be more open.
And did that help, Joe? Did that help writing? Did you share that initially, or was the writing, a way for you to share what was going on in your own experience?
Yeah, I think I'd had so many years of keeping it quiet, and I just thought I've got to try something different. Maybe keeping all the kind of shame and kind of feeling guilty or embarrassed about it was kind of contributing to the depression when I was in a depression, and was a barrier between, from me connecting properly with other people. So initially I felt much better. And when I was kind of on an upwards spiral again in that kind of early 2020, I felt really kind of energized, and I had a really positive response to kind of a Facebook post, in a kind of closed group. And then I kind of posted up personally, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're so strong and brave." And I was thinking, well, not really, but this is why I've got to talk about it, because otherwise people think it's strong and brave when so many people are going through similar things.
Or we only see one side of it, don't we? We only see one type of bipolar that is shared in the media, and I suppose that's a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, that was before the bipolar, so that was more about the depression and the anxiety, and the kind of it was more around the kind of the real lows, the kind of dark thoughts, suicidal thoughts that I'd experienced. I thought, I don't within the world of suicide prevention that I'm quite heavily involved in now, there's a lot of people that are bereaved by suicide that are advocates in that work, and there's far less. There are people, but there's far less visible people, I think, in terms of people that have that lived experience of um, having those thoughts and trying to explain what it feels like, because it is so exposing. So while I felt confident, I was kind of self-employed at the time, so I didn't have an employer to kind of be concerned about. But I did think about, if I put this on LinkedIn or something, is this going to affect future career prospects? But I think I just took the attitude of
Mm.
I've just got to try and do something different, and I want to be that change. I want to stop other people feeling alone. I wanted to help other people who were trying to support other people going through that. I felt empowered. I felt, positive about it initially. And then when my mental health started to dip again, which was kind of middle of 2020, I felt really exposed. I felt really exposed by having opened up. I did find that more people kind of checked in on me when I kind of disappeared, because I'd kind of announced, I suppose, that one of my tells was that I would kind of withdraw from social media or withdraw from like messages with friends and family. So I did have people kind of checking in, saying, "No, I've noticed this. Are you okay?" And at the time, I found that kind of it was nice to feel that people were noticing, but equally, I felt powerless and out of control. Like I couldn't stop the downward spiral, and I couldn't stop. I didn't, people offering to help, but I didn't know how they could help me. So I felt more kind of exposed and vulnerable, and that was kind of a cycle I went through for a few years. So I really came at the kind of mental health and neurodiversity area, really, that kind of early 2020s, from a kind of mental health perspective of knowing quite a bit about depression, anxiety, and then having been in the kind of advocacy space, but I didn't know much about neurodiversity or autism until traits were first identified in my children, which was kind of happened around early 2021. I think COVID had a big impact on both of them. Then suddenly other people started to notice them a bit more, at school and that kind of thing. So it was only kind of through looking into things through them that I really kind of stepped into that world. And then when I stepped into that world, there were so many mental health issues, and I found it a really strange juxtaposition that I'd come from the mental health world where neurodiversity and autism were really not, they never really came up. And yet then I stepped into the autistic kind of online community and kind of embraced, that sphere, and there were just kind of mental health issues, you know, all over the place. And I just found it really, really strange that I hadn't heard about it from the mental health side of things. The two things seemed very separate. But I was quite lucky around that time. Another kind of impulsive, hypermanic experience was setting up a not-for-profit company aimed at kind of, the idea was for an online platform that would go into maybe schools and would give information around mental health and neurodiversity. So through that, I met a colleague who came on board as one of the founding directors, called Kate Dean, and she'd been a unseen disabilities specialist working in a university, and she really gave me the kind of founding principles in terms of like the social model of disability and seeing the strengths as well as the challenges of autism and other neurodivergent conditions. So I think I was lucky that at the outset of my exploration of autism that I had a kind of this guide that was realistic but also kind of neurodifference affirming. And I think a lot of people step into exploring autism and you read the kind of horror stories or you see everything is negative, that people aren't capable, that it's, it's really bad news to be autistic. Whereas I had that kind of positive that yes, there are challenges, but with the right support, people can do a lot. And I know that Kate always said that, people would turn up at university with a long list of things they couldn't do, but they wouldn't necessarily know the things that they were really good at or the support that they needed to be able to succeed. And I just thought that, yeah, that's really, we've got to kind of do something about that. So yeah, then initially I actually thought I might have ADHD. I'd always thought of ADHD as being from growing up as kind of, it seemed to be naughty young boys, that would antisocial behave. It seemed to be kind of all tied up in that. I'd never actually looked at the symptoms of ADHD until kind of early 2021. And I did actually try and get referred for assessment, and it didn't. Referral was rejected because of lack of evidence in childhood. And that really kind of set me back in terms of seeking support, because I felt dismissed and invalidated. It makes a lot of sense now in terms of having the bipolar diagnosis, but it didn't at the time. I just felt like nobody cares in terms of, I received a text message saying your referral's not been accepted.
So there's already a few things, isn't there, in your story that you're describing already about not seeing yourself or not seeing your experiences in the way that they are depicted in others, and how that can fuel, can't it, kind of your own understanding and, seeking support or seeking a diagnosis if you're not seeing yourself reflected.
Yeah, and I think possibly having the kind of multiple different conditions makes it harder. I know a lot of people have, co-occurring conditions. It's very common. But I think sometimes they kind of mask each other. So when you're looking at most conditions, if you look on the NHS or other things, you're looking at one set of traits or, one particular characteristics, a presentation. And if it doesn't quite fit, you kind of think, oh, well, it can't apply to me then. And I suppose having had the experience of thinking, oh, maybe I'm ADHD, I was then really reluctant to, even although I felt like there was a good chance that I could be autistic because traits have been identified in both children. Certainly one of my children seemed, it was quite clear autistic traits. They kind of matched the stereotype more, even though we'd missed it until they were, 6 or 7. Yeah, it was really invalidating, and then feeling unseen, misunderstood, that's a really big trigger for me. I've kind of realised through kind of therapy now. And it was that eventually getting the kind of professional help, I suppose, that did eventually make me feel seen. But still, I found in mental health circles with kind of psychiatrists and therapy, not that much understanding of neurodiversity and autism and ADHD. So I was really, when I realised that I was autistic, I was initially really, really angry with how much had been missed, how I'd had all these mental health problems and nobody had ever gone far enough back, I don't think, in terms of looking at like how I was as a child. When I'd experienced depression kind of first in my late 20s, nobody had gone far enough back to see the traits that were probably more visible as a child, and I'd kind of got better at masking and kind of fitting in as I've gotten older. So yeah, it was only it was kind of a personal family kind of scenario that really forced that upon us. My husband's sister was given a terminal cancer diagnosis in early 2021, and she'd been my husband's main support through my kind of years of mental health ups and downs. She was a doctor herself, and she had thought, like my husband, for a while that bipolar could be a factor. So it was really they kind of persuaded me, you've had this depression, for a long time. Nothing seems to be working to kind of long term give you that stability. So why don't you, go and see a psychiatrist and have an assessment and see what they think. So, but even seeing the psychiatrist, it took 18 months really from first seeing the psychiatrist to then being diagnosed with the bipolar.
Did autism come into that conversation at that point?
I'd introduced it into the conversation because I was already aware of it through the children. So I said I was considering autism, but, the psychiatrist had been quite open, so, that wasn't his specialist area. And I had I've had a bit of a fractious relationship, I suppose, with the psychiatrist. We have a good working relationship now in terms of understanding, but initially I found him quite cold and a bit dismissive of my assertions. But I suppose he's just the expert, and it's seeing somebody for an hour or then half an hour in a review appointment. You're only getting a snapshot, kind of in a hypomanic phase that he was like, oh yeah, I think, right, well, we'll do an actual more psychometric assessment. My husband at the time said, I think that's probably the first time he's seen you kind of not some level of depressed, and being able to see the sharp contrast between the kind of low and the high.
You said there that, the psychiatrist is the expert, but actually, you're also the expert of yourself and what your experience is. And I think that's often the missing part of all of this, isn't it? That we see professionals as being the experts in the thing that they're the expert in, but actually there's two experts in the room at any time, and that is the individual and the professional. And you're the person who has lived your life, you're the person who has day to day understands yourself more than anybody will understand yourself. Did you feel like an expert in the room?
I didn't initially. I felt like the victim and the kind of vulnerable person that I think for a long time I was just looking for someone to come and save me and give me the answer and maybe give me some medication that would magically solve it. I felt like I'd worked for so long. I'd tried different things. I'd tried talking therapy. I'd been on antidepressant medication for a long time, which I didn't really like, and I was not sure how effective it was. I just felt lost and like I didn't know myself. It took me a long time to agree to try talking therapy again, which I started in January 23, and that I was eventually convinced to kind of try that again. And I fortunately found someone that, I've been working with ever since, on a kind of weekly or fortnightly basis. And that's been really important, to find that person that he doesn't have the kind of specialist knowledge around neurodiversity, but he's been willing to treat me as the expert in myself, read things that I've sent to him or listen and validate my experiences. But when I first started working with him, I remember him saying, what do you want and what do you need? And I was just like, I have no idea. I've absolutely no idea what I want or what I need. We've just been through the trauma of losing my sister-in-law and the kind of ripple effects of that on my husband, my mother-in-law who lives with us, and children. And it was just so many things kind of all caught up in one. I just really kind of felt lost in myself. I'd
Mm.
lost my identity. You know, I found that used to happen quite a lot with depressed spells. I would just really lose the sense of who myself, lose all self-confidence. Um, and now I think I'm a much better advocate for me, and I'm a much better advocate for my children, because I recognise that I am the expert in me. I'm more of an expert on my children often than the professionals, because I've got the full picture, whereas they're only getting, in a kind of 10 or 30-minute appointment, they're only getting a small snapshot. And I think it's just really difficult to convey that complexity to professionals. I do respect professionals' opinion and their knowledge, but often their knowledge is so specific and so silo based that they don't necessarily see the connections that are needed to join up the dots. So
Yeah, and like you say, when there's all of these kind of intersectional layers of different things, that you're experiencing, people miss it, don't they? People don't see it. But you've talked there about what really helped you finally feel seen and understood. You've touched on there quite a few things that have really helped you to better manage your life with this new found understanding that you have. You've talked about your own confidence, feeling empowered, your writing, your advocacy, talking therapy, medication, sharing with others what happens when you perhaps need more support. I just wonder, what are some of the small things that really help to make the biggest difference for you when life just becomes really overwhelming?
yeah, I think it's a lot of little things coming together. I think understanding myself and how I relate to others has been the biggest thing that's helped, as I've understood and kind of peeled back the layers of the different, kind of first realizing I was, recognizing kind of PDA traits, then self-identifying as autistic, then the bipolar on top of that. Initially, it was just kind of got the bipolar diagnosis, and having been kind of quite euphoric on realizing I was autistic and having a really positive experience, I found the actual bipolar diagnosis quite crushing, and then I couldn't really give my attention to it then, probably for another 6, 8 months. It's kind of being able to afford that long-term therapeutic support from input from the psychiatrist and therapist been crucial. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what you think, I've not been considered ill enough to qualify for a psychiatrist on the NHS. Many people only receive that level of care when they're in crisis or they've been hospitalised. So I do think that the diagnosis came just in time for me to put in place therapeutic and kind of lifestyle changes to manage life better. So I've been able to avoid a kind of more harsher medication, mood stabilising medication so far. For me, it's my closest relationship. So that's my husband, my parents, my children, my mother-in-law, long-standing friends, wider family. They've always been a really significant protective factor for me with my mental health. I think a hug for me is one of the biggest and most powerful things. It's something, my husband's not really a hugger, but I have finally drummed into him that if I'm upset or that I don't need logic and I don't need reason. Sometimes I just need that hug, which just signals that kind of, I see you, I hear that you're in pain or you're distressed or you're struggling. And it's just like, I'm here, I'm by your side.
And the oxytocin that will release in our bodies when we receive that hug. Just talking about your husband there, you were saying that your husband, was it back in 2019 that he was the first one to really float the idea of bipolar. So when you got your diagnosis for bipolar then, was it quite validating for your husband to finally, we're talking about what helped you to feel seen and understood. How was that for him?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was a relief. I found it really, actually, his reaction really kind of triggered a negative reaction in me. I think it was was kind of responded as kind of, oh well, I knew Helen always said it was bipolar, and I was just a bit like, well, why weren't you stronger and in making me get support earlier on, or why, if you were so certain, didn't you push, which was really unfair because he had tried to make me see that, but I was often in a phase where I wouldn't listen to reason, particularly in those high phases, and I couldn't see the kind of impact that my behaviour and the way I was behaving was kind of impacting other people. So yeah, I think he found it really reassuring that he wasn't imagining it. So he's always accompanied me to my psychiatrist appointments. It's a bit unusual perhaps, but I wanted him there when I first went as support. So he does kind of input, because I think it's so hard when you have the extremes to know what normal is. Normal becomes skewed, and I think sometimes you can't see what's happening when you're so in it yourself, either really down or really kind of going towards high. You just kind of get lost a bit in your own world. Being autistic, you can kind of, you can have those traits anyway, so probably it kind of exacerbates. But yeah, he found it really, really validating, but I was just then completely crushed and cried a lot. But he was really supportive, and he just gave me space and time. And like I said, we've been through a really challenging few years, but I feel that our relationship's much stronger now because we understand each other better. I understand myself more, and I think I've taken more responsibility, kind of been gently nudged, I suppose, by my therapist along the way in terms of identifying more what I need, identifying boundaries. But I think I didn't have other boundaries, and then I would let people kind of do things that I found irritating or were kind of putting upon me. And then at some point I would explode and get really angry about it, which obviously people would find confusing because they'd be like, oh, well, I thought it was fine, you've not said anything before, and all of a sudden the internal rage would kind of overwhelm me and come out and, kind of be quite a destructive emotional experience for me and whoever was on the receiving end of it.
You can liken it to a volcano, can't you? If just nobody sees what's bubbling under the surface until it explodes and the destruction of the lava that then comes out. It sounds though like, talking about the people in your life, you've talked about yourself and taking responsibility and advocacy, but you also need other people in your world, don't you, to honour, to support those boundaries, to support you when you need that. And that's something that you've really explored there. And I wonder about your own self-acceptance. You've kind of touched on this, Jo, but stigma, it can be really heavy, especially with what you experience through the co-occurring conditions. When people don't understand, when people misunderstand, what are the things that have really helped you, do you think, towards a sense of self-acceptance?
I think with autism, I didn't really have a sense of stigma so much. I know that stigma exists outside there, but because I'd found that community mostly online, I felt like I had a community there to be part of. So when I had the realization that I was autistic and got confident self-identifying, I felt kind of welcomed in. I felt like I had others I could look to whose experiences, if they didn't quite match my own, there were different elements of other people's experiences that I saw in my own. Whereas when I had the bipolar diagnosis, I think the stigma around that is huge. I don't know, say on LinkedIn, for example, I know quite a few autistic, ADHD, people with mental health difficulties. I don't know many, maybe one or two people that are openly have bipolar. So I didn't have any kind of role models to look to. I found it really hard because I knew about kind of unconscious bias and stigma. I was kind of getting annoyed at myself because I knew that I was being really stigmatizing in my view of bipolar. But I'd looked at Bipolar UK, who are a really great small charity. I'd looked at their website when I was going through the assessment process with the psychiatrist, and I'd used some of their resources to kind of help identify that for myself. And I knew that there was a local peer support group, but I just I imagined this group of people that were just not like me, you know, potentially into drugs or gambling or, you know, potentially doing wild things when they were experiencing mania. I just thought I just didn't see myself really. So it did take me a long time, but it was kind of in spring kind of 2024, so around about nearly a year after my diagnosis, I kind of emerged from a depressed spell. And I was thinking, I really need to, like I did with the kind of autism, I suppose I was reflecting on that and thinking, I really just need to try and understand more about bipolar. So I looked on their Bipolar UK website and they had a couple of videos by Jack called Just Ask a Question. So JAAQ. And it's a platform and it basically splits an interview down into, but you can look at specific questions that are just a couple of minutes. So it just breaks it all down. So I looked at those and you can kind of move backwards and forwards through the answers. And through seeing those, I saw a bit of myself. I saw two people who were employed, who were managing life, who were, you know, living full, varied lives. And I thought, oh, you know, it is possible to live well with bipolar. Whereas I think before I just got so bogged down in it's a severe mental illness and you're going to have to be managing this for the rest of your life. And um, you know, it felt like it controlled my life for, you know, 7 or 8 years and I was never going to get control of it. So I saw some of my experiences mirrored in theirs. So it just made me more accepting of the diagnosis and it made me more determined to be able to live better with it. I spoke a lot about the bipolar and what I thought were kind of interactions between bipolar and my autistic traits. And then I did finally go to the Bipolar UK local peer support group, and that was probably the biggest thing in terms of helping me move beyond, because I just walked into a room full of ordinary people, a variety of ages, genders, you know, some people there with partners or parents who would support them because the groups are open to carers as well, and just being able to have an open kind of honest conversations around challenges or successes or issues with medication. It just gave me that space where I felt seen and like I didn't have to pretend that I could, and other people that just understood the challenges, you know, so I could say, you know, I really quite like the hypermanic episodes. I'm not really sure I want to kind of give them up, and other people just, you know, kind of nodding along and that, but then realizing, you know, that has a really detrimental impact, you know, and probably leads to me to burning out. And then that leads to depression. And, you know, so it's realizing that everything's connected and it's just that feeling of, it's like I found in my parent carer role, I found a peer support group for some help with some issues that I was having with my children. I think just being able to sit in a room with people in a safe space that's got a facilitator where there's no obligation to talk, but you can if you want to. And just to feel seen, heard, understood without having to feel like you've got to go into lengthy explanations as to what's going on or why certain things might happen. I think it's just that sense of feeling seen.
Yeah, it sounds like that belonging that you're describing, and those peer support groups have really been instrumental then in that shift towards your own self-acceptance. And I wonder, Jo, in those kind of peer support groups that you've been a part of and you are a part of, have you met other autistic people who are also autistic and bipolar?
Yeah, there's other people that were, yeah, that either they've had a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's, and yeah, it doesn't seem that uncommon, you know. And I've come across other people who have ADHD or have been misdiagnosed as ADHD when they have bipolar, or diagnosed as bipolar and they have ADHD. So I think there's quite a lot of crossover, you know. So I recognise now that as a child I was quite anxious and didn't feel like I fitted in, then how that could contribute to kind of, you know, mental health challenges, that feeling of not fitting in, of not necessarily feeling safe. I lived in a bit of a protective bubble where I had my safe people that I could engage with. So it wasn't until I kind of went out into the world more and had to engage with other people that kind of my differences then became I became more aware of them, I suppose, in terms of how hard I found it to kind of just converse with other people without overthinking it, or feeling like I was either talking too much or not talking enough. I feel now, through having met other people online and then now met people in person, there's a number of people that have, got neurodivergent children, or also neurodivergent themselves, and received diagnoses or self-identify later. The two kind of overlap in terms of needs and challenges. I think it's often people that are a bit more on the margins of society or of groups. We don't quite fit in for different reasons, but then we can kind of be more appreciative of other people that maybe don't fit in.
And you've talked, Jo, there about your experiences growing up and the support through your family. When you look back at the points where maybe you've reached breaking points or burnout, or you've had a mental health crisis, think about what support from others has really helped to get you through. And how would you want parents and carers who are listening to this episode, what would you want them to know about how they can support someone in those moments? I mean, you talked earlier about, telling your husband that a hug is really helpful. Like, I don't want you to talk to me or fix things. In those moments, a hug is really helpful. So what would you say to parents and carers who are listening to know about what to do to support somebody if they're at that crisis point or breaking point?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I've had to support my own children and other people through breaking points and crises, and I don't think I've gotten it right all the time. I don't think I've necessarily made the right decisions, but I think understanding yourself, currently sort of I've been able to support other people around me better as I've understood myself, and it made sure that my mental health is better, that I'm looking after myself, and that gives me then more capacity to actually help others. So I think it's really hard to help others if you're trying to help from a place of an empty cup, the idea of, put your own oxygen mask on first. So before you try and help, kind of make sure you've got that capacity. I think particularly for being autistic, understanding about autistic burnout has been crucial in terms of, and particularly with the bipolar and how that interacts with the kind of hypomania. I think I've understood in retrospect that what I was experiencing was probably a period of hypomania, which would be super productive, loads of ideas, loads of connections, loads of being super connected with other people, lots of messages, lots of emails, being really, lots of ideas, getting involved in loads of things. And that would then lead me to burnout. And then, but because I'd experienced depression, I would think, oh, I'm starting to get depressed. So I would then apply kind of anti-depression strategies, which generally involve kind of activating and keeping going with activities and things. And actually, because I was experiencing burnout, what I needed to do was to rest, to give my mind and body a chance to reset and recuperate. It's trying to make small adjustments, small accommodations to keep myself more on a stable middle ground. Or if I was supporting someone else, what little stresses can you take away? What slack can you take up from someone if it's someone that's, say an adult, another parent, carer, if it's your partner, listening to people when they're in a crisis. I'm as bad as anyone, trying to support my children and just actually not really hearing what they're actually saying, maybe not believing the extent of what they're experiencing, kind of invalidating or dismissing as, it's so easy to do as a parent. You say, oh, that noise isn't too loud. It's not too bad. Just keep going into school. You'll be fine. I think sometimes it's really hard to strike that balance, especially with a child, that's going through their own development, when to push to say, just try and do something. And when you actually need to back off and say, no, I can see you just need to rest. I can see it's really hard right now. You need to just take it off. So for my children, I'll check in on them, fetch them drinks, food. Sometimes, one of my children eats alone to meet his needs. And it's just that kind of regular check-in without being too demanding. I know for me, it's just that regular check-in. Now, say if I'm experiencing a really bad depressed spell, my mum, say, will ring me every day, when my husband's at work, and they tend to have to do most of the talking because I really lose my language abilities in both kind of speaking and writing. I find it really hard to express myself when I'm in that low period. So it's just someone talking on about the mundane things of life that are going on for them, and not kind of adding extra problems or needing to make decisions or that kind of thing. Making them feel like you're there. You can, if they've got something challenging to do, maybe doing it together. I really appreciate it if other relatives or friends, arrange something and then I've just got to turn up, and then that's it. And I think it's just having those relationships where you can feel you can be yourself and you can say, I'm not feeling great, but I know it'll benefit me to come along and see you. But, I'm not going to be the life and soul of the party. Maybe, it's just having people that understand you and that can give you that understanding, give you that space, or give you those opportunities, give you that push, shall we go for a walk, or just those kind of little nudges in the right direction. I think certainly with PDA, it's best not to direct anything too specific, but just the kind of gentle suggestions of, oh, that might be good, or thought about that.
Yeah, suggestions rather than demands.
Although we can be experts in ourselves and I really value peer support, there is a point where, you can kind of benefit from having, chat with a GP, therapy. I really would advocate therapy, and there's various, it can be very hard through the NHS, but there's various kind of low cost therapists options. I know a lot of student therapists or organisations, charities now. It can be very difficult, and I think kind of if you're a parent or carer of somebody else, actually looking at what the possibilities are and kind of suggesting them, leaving them there as an option for someone, it can be taking a bit of the legwork out of actually looking for something. It's almost like the point at which you need help is the point at which you're least capable of seeking for yourselves. If you're looking after yourself, I think kind of being a bit more proactive, and future medication options, say for the bipolar, I've looked into when I'm well. So when I'm not well, I'm more informed.
Yeah. And I suppose that leads me into our final bit of the conversation, which is about, self care, especially as a parent. We were just talking there about support that other people can help with. But what would you say self care looks like for you? What gives you hope for the future as you continue navigating life as yourself and, with these co occurring conditions, or being autistic, bipolar, PDA? What really helps you in terms of self-care?
For me, it's having time to myself. I like being around other people. I used to think I was a real loner, and I liked being alone and liked my own company, and I do, but I really feed off other people. I do like having time to myself. So typically it's kind of running, or I like gardening. I usually listen to music, or I listen to podcasts, and yoga I've done for the last few years, and having been quite dismissive of the benefits of yoga for years, I have found it quite beneficial. I love doing cross stitch embroidery, so I tend to go in phases with that, and that's my kind of release. It's kind of, don't find doing nothing relaxing, so I tend to have to be doing something. Something I think I find, like with gardening or cross stitch, it's something that's physical. It helps me kind of separate out. It distances me from emotions sometimes if I'm finding emotions overwhelming. And then the kind of peer support I've already said about, that's my kind of self-care. Possibly a bit bizarrely, but I found kind of attending conferences I've used as my kind of self-care away days to myself. My children are at home 24/7, so actually, because one's home educated and one's got an EOTAS package from home, so actually any time out of the house is really time for me and self-care for me. It's that time to be kind of uninterrupted, and being in a space where I can kind of connect with other people, where I can feed off other people's energy. So I've been to a few conferences over the last couple of years. They tend to be around my kind of special interests, which are around neurodiversity and mental health, suicide prevention. But I've really appreciated those, and I do refer to them as that's my self-care. And yeah, just continuing to work and use my skills. I think as a parent carer, it's easy to get your identity lost. It's easy to kind of undervalue your own caring role. So I think kind of connecting with other parent carers has been really useful for that. But also I take a lot of pride in my work, and it's just having that connection with other people that say, yeah, that was really good, that was really helpful. That really helps, keep me going, and it helps make me feel like me and being valued for me rather than just being mum. And I'm sure many mums feel undervalued. I think kind of losing expectations of my children in particular, just kind of taken away all kind of demands and expectations. And I've actually found that that's much better for my self-care, because I'm not setting myself or them up to fail for things that they're not quite capable of at that time, and valuing instead, when they do say thank you for things, when they are, upset, they want me around, and it's a problem if I'm not around, I take that as that's their sign of their kind of love and appreciation. So kind of letting go of those kind of societal family expectations. It can be, we feel so much pressure, I think, so much stigma from needing to meet other people's expectations. And actually, a lot of those things are just born out of that's just what we've always done, or that's always what's been accepted, and those things change over time. So actually, why not just appreciate what we have, try and focus on the positives, try and focus on what we can control. I think I've done that much better in recent years. My husband said a few years ago, it's like, well, stop trying to change the world, and just kind of focus on us, in our family for a while. And I think I've done that much better now. I've kind of aligned my work and my interests. And so it is focused on helping me, helping my children, supporting my wider family and friends, but also kind of building on that. So rather than trying to change the world and have that impact us, I'm trying to change my world and have that impact, and then have it ripple out, hopefully.
I love that, Jo. Changing your world and watching those ripples expand, because a lot of what you've talked about there is about being able to do things the way that you need them to be done. You talked about, small adjustments, small accommodations of doing those things for other people, and actually you're doing those things for yourself.
But I am hopeful now for the future. I've managed to achieve a period of mental stability. I went through a full calendar year in 2025 without any depressed or hypermanic episodes, and that kind of, even just a couple of years ago, just felt unachievable and like something that I was never going to get to. And it's taken a lot of work on my part. It's taken, that long-term therapeutic relationship support from my close family and friends. So it just feels like I'm in a much more positive place, that I understand myself, I understand other people a bit better, and I'm just in a stronger position now, more informed, more knowledgeable about when and where to seek external support as well.
And that really reflects, doesn't it, all of that work that you have been doing behind the scenes that will often go unseen. But thank you for coming on the podcast, for taking the time to really bring your voice to this space and just to speak so honestly about your experiences. I think that what you've shared today, Jo, will really mean a great deal to many people listening who recognise themselves or someone they love and care for in what you've talked about today. So thank you. If any of the topics mentioned in today's episode are of special interest to you and you'd like to discuss this further, you can book a one-to-one session with a peer guide on our website at autismcentral.org.uk. Autism Central would encourage listeners to do their own research and make informed decisions about any strategies or equipment mentioned in this podcast. Any advice or suggestions given by a guest or peer educator do not replace or substitute advice received from direct consultation with a qualified professional. The Autism Central podcast is produced by Autism Central and is the copyright of NHS England.